Hello, everyone. I'm Saleha, and this is Chai, Chat, and Community. Tonight, we talk about COVID-19 and how it's still present in our community in a new variant form. But before I introduce you to my guests, who are experts in this field, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting tonight, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you for joining us, Mohamed Bhai, John. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very
And
much for the
Thank you.
invitation.
and before we start talking about COVID, do you want to introduce yourselves to our audience?
John, you want to go ahead?
Well, thank you, Mohamed. Mohamed and I work very closely together, so we'll mix and match a bit as we go through this session, Saleha. So look, John Catford, I'm a medical doctor. In fact, I'm a public health doctor, and I've worked in Victoria now for 25 years in the health system, in universities, and also with the Victorian government. And I've been helping the Victorian government and a whole range of agencies over the last 2 years with trying to manage the COVID pandemic, to try and help people understand what's really important, maybe what's not so important, not what to get concerned about and not what to get concerned about. So it's been a very interesting journey. I've learned a great deal, and I'm sure I will learn lots tonight, Saleha.
Thank you. Mohamed Bhai?
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. And thank you very much. And it's been a journey John and I have traveled, I think, since 2020. I think we worked a lot with the Muslim community of how to prevent and safeguard the community as well. So my name is Mohamed Mohideen. I'm one of the commissioners in the Victorian Multicultural Commission, but I'm also a microbiologist, so this is close to my heart. So in the last 2 years, I've been working in the Department of Health promoting the COVID vaccine. And I worked with John on numerous occasions of supporting the community and how best to keep the community safe. Yeah.
Thank you. So in simple terms, because we have our audience is basically multicultural, how would you explain the new COVID-19 variant and how is it different from the previous one? So that's two parts of the question. Do each one of you want to take one part?
Well, I think the microbiologist should start.
Yeah. Thanks, John. So with viruses, one of the key things to remember is they will continuously mutate. So we are not seeing the end of the variants that we are seeing at the moment. So the latest variant, the B5, just give me 2 seconds. So the variant that is out there, which is referred to as
it's XBB 1.5.
Yeah,
it's
XBB, which is also called Kraken. Kraken is given a name called Kraken as well. So it's an interesting combination. And what we are seeing in this whole area is that, yes, it is there. There are about, I think, 65 cases that have been identified in Victoria. How virulent it is, people really don't know. And it is the same with all variants that come initially. People are trying to work out, and this was, I think, this came out last November, really, and it's been there in the community. So, yes, people are getting infected. No one really has a real grasp of how the infection is, how serious the infection is. But we need to consider that all strains are infectious, and all strains can cause problems in humans. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I think we're living at a time where there's a sort of COVID soup, if you could imagine a soup with lots of different vegetables in it. And that's a bit how we are at the moment. I mean, in the early days, we just had one dominant strain, which, ran across the whole world. But now we're seeing lots of new strains, and they change a bit in terms of their relative importance. So we've got maybe half a dozen strains, and they're, one is growing faster and another one is dropping. And as Mohamed's saying, it's because these viruses mutate. And if one of these mutations has an advantage, a selective advantage, that it's maybe more infectious, than the others, then it will begin to become dominant, and that's sort of what we're seeing. And of course, therefore, we need to keep up our response to adapt to the changing nature of these viruses, and that's been a real challenge for all of us over the last year or so.
And there's still many, many new cases in thousands every week.
There are, fortunately, the current wave is subsiding, which is very good. I mean, I think we're down to about 3,000 cases each week now in Victoria, which is a lot lower than it was, say, a month or 2 months ago. We probably, though, it's truthful to know, we don't actually know really how many cases there are, because the reporting requirements by the government has changed, and probably there could be 3 or 4 times more cases than actually is being reported. But certainly what is true is that we're not experiencing such bad infection now. We can see that because the hospital numbers have declined quite a bit. I think there's something like only 100 people in hospital with COVID at the moment, and only 2 in ICU. So that's a huge difference when we had hundreds and hundreds of people in hospital and scores of people, many people in ICU, on ventilators. So we're in a much better place than we were a few months ago. But that doesn't mean we need to be complacent, because we know as these viruses mutate, there may be another one that comes through that is more infectious, possibly even
and with winter's coming, winters is just a few months away.
It is. And the trouble there, and I'm sure Mohamed would comment, is that people tend to go indoors more, they're closer to each other. And so if another variant does get going, it will spread pretty quickly, like we've seen with the other variants.
Mamata, you want to say something?
Yeah, that's very true. I think John has covered, and I think it's that idea of that COVID is still real. COVID can still cause infection, serious infection in some, and then can also cause death in people. And I'll give you a good example. And I think it's important to understand that, yes, many of us, if we do get COVID because we're vaccinated as well, we might get a mild attack. But especially in some of the elderly, this can be a problem. And the best example I can give is one of my mom's cousins, an elderly uncle of mine. He was 92 years. He and his wife and his family got COVID last month. And they recovered. Okay, they came out of COVID, but 2 weeks later, his kidneys packed up. And he unsadly passed away. His wife, all her muscles got affected by it, and she was basically bedridden. And both he and my aunt were in hospital, and she was so bedridden, she couldn't even go for the funeral. So this happened last month. So it's new. And so this is why I always keep saying that we need to take care and look after our vulnerable and elderly, because we never know how because COVID is not like a typical textbook infection where you say everyone gets this, everyone comes out at the end of it with blah, blah, blah. But here, it can depend on the person to person. And we've seen, sadly, especially with elderly, it can end up in death as well.
Thank you. Most importantly, why is vaccination important? 5th dose is available now.
Yes. Very true.
I know many people who haven't even taken the 3rd dose.
I think, yes, vaccination, I think, is very important. I think what's happened is there's this fatigue about vaccines. I think there's so much in the beginning, in 2021, when we started vaccinating. Yes, we went on a real strong messaging, and in Victoria, we were very lucky. We got up to 95% second dose level. But what we need to understand with vaccines is, unfortunately, it's not a lifelong immunity it provides. Even the infection does not provide lifelong immunity. So it has a period, it has a time, 6 months, 3 months, and then we got vaccinated. And most of us, I think, would have at the moment maybe 3 doses, yes, to a certain extent, 4 doses, about 40-odd%. The 5th dose has just been introduced, and they have suggested that a person who has got the 4th dose, they can take it after 6 months. Again, my idea is that I strongly believe in vaccines, so I'm not an anti-vaccine. I'm a very strong believer in vaccines, because I believe prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely.
And taking the vaccines, I think, helps our immune system to also be more active. And we are, as you mentioned, Saleh, we are going into winter. Things can change. We are going to closed environments. It's more important that we protect each other against further infection. And as John mentioned, we are having new variants. We could have a very strong variant, can cause more problems as well. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, can I just sort of add to
yes,
what Mohamed said? I think that the vaccination story from COVID is actually quite remarkable. And I know in the middle of all this, we hear lots of different opinions and lots of conspiracy theories. But I think, honestly, our children's children will look back at this time and say, one of the most remarkable medical breakthroughs was the speed in which we were able to develop effective vaccines against COVID, and that it saved millions of lives. I mean, I'm strongly in belief of that. I think it's been quite remarkable that we were able to come up with a vaccine and to apply it across the world with huge benefit. And that's, of course, why we are in Australia so much better off now, because of the benefit of so many people having vaccination. And when they do get COVID, because it doesn't absolutely prevent it, it's often just a mild disease, and people can get back to work very quickly. And it's quite remarkable if we just think back 2 years when in some countries the death toll was terrible.
Absolutely.
Hospitals overwhelmed, health staff. I mean, I'm from the UK originally, and the president of the College of Physicians wrote to us all recently to say, 20 doctors have died from COVID in Britain.
Wow.
From catching COVID, so I mean, the impact on health workers was massive in the UK. Fortunately, not so much in Australia, although there has been a lot of burnout amongst health workers, and I'm sure some of the people listening may be working in the health system and they know exactly what I'm talking about. But whatever we might think about how things were managed, we are very fortunate in Australia that we have escaped a lot of the problems. And, I would put it down to this very progressive vaccination program that we've developed. But of course, the story is not over, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment, because as Mohamed was saying, just because you've been vaccinated or just because you've had COVID doesn't mean somehow you're now immune. That's not the case.
So, John, I have some friends who are also in the medical profession, like you. They've had the third shot. They are now contemplating whether the fourth shot will actually do something. Fifth shot, of course, they're not even thinking about it. So how do you convince medical professionals that, you need to get vaccinated? For me, it's like, as Mohamed said, prevention is better than cure. So I would always, I'm up to date with my vaccination. And I come from India, where from the time you are born, you're constantly vaccinated against this, that, polio, smallpox, chickenpox, MMR, you name it, and we've been vaccinated. So it's a no-brainer for me. And when we moved here, you get your flu shot, you still getting flu shots. So I want to be vaccinated. But if medical professionals are thinking vaccinations are not worth it, then we have a serious problem, isn't it?
Yeah, we do. But I must say, I don't mix with the sort of people you're talking to, because certainly the medical professionals I speak with are very supportive of this and encourage their patients. And I think it comes down to, what is the benefit to you and your family if you get vaccinated? And the benefit is you're very likely to avoid serious disease. You're very likely to avoid getting long COVID. You're very likely to prevent someone who you love or care for getting COVID and getting those problems. So if you've got elderly relatives, for example, if you don't have the disease, you can't pass it to them. So there are lots of reasons, I think, for why you personally should seriously think about vaccinated, but also the people you love and care for, to protect them. So, I mean, that's why I think it's a compelling story. But I know some people are confused and get worked up about things, and so I think it's really important we continue to be very open and honest about what we know and what we don't know, and take the people with us. I think it's quite right for people to ask questions and to question medical bodies and others. And I think the government's got to continue to play a role here in keeping it on our agenda. And I'll just finish in a moment, but I think somehow we need to move beyond this sort of a bit of hysteria about COVID. I mean, it's a nasty disease, and we should prevent it. We should start thinking a bit like influenza now, that we just get our flu jab once a year as winter comes. I mean, I think that's where we're heading for. And we don't want to, make too much of it. I think very likely we're going to have a combined flu and COVID jab, which will make it a lot easier. So,
absolutely.
So, it's one jab and that's it. And, I think, frankly, in a few years' time, we'll wonder what all this fuss has been about. But nevertheless, at the moment, I think it's really important for people to be up to date. But if I could just add, and Mohamed's very much an expert in this area as well, that it's not so much about which dose you've had, whether it's third, fourth, fifth, it's whether you've had a recent dose. And the current advice from our top experts is that really, if you haven't had a vaccination in the last 6 months, or you haven't had COVID, then it would be very wise to get a booster. And the new boosters do seem to have an impact on the new strains. That that some of the companies are now trying to keep pace with where the strains are going. So that the new boosters are likely to be more effective than the early doses, because the strains have mutated and evolved. So, I'm sure we'll say this many times tonight, but if you haven't been vaccinated or had COVID in the last 6 months, do think seriously about getting another booster.
Thank you.
And as my fourth dose, I took the bivalent vaccine from Moderna. So it is available, as John mentioned, the new vaccines it's a bivalent vaccine, and strongly encourage people to take it. It's readily available for many of the pharmacies as well, so they can get it. And I took my fourth dose before I was traveling last year to Spain in November. And I went to Spain. I went all over, and I also went in January for Umrah, where there's 1 million people. I did wear my mask, but I think by God's grace, the vaccine does help, keep you safe. I think so. It's important, as John said. We cannot reiterate how important taking the vaccine is. It is, again, a preventative measure. It's not going to stop you from ever getting COVID, but it helps you reduce the symptoms and keeps your family safe at the end of the day.
And that's the most important thing. Yes.
If you get COVID and come home, you could pass it on to maybe the elderly. And many of us, especially when the call community, live in extended families with our elderly relatives as well at home. So, and they might have other health issues. And as much as possible, keeping everyone safe. Vaccination is one way of keeping people safe.
So, I think no, sorry, John, I interrupted you.
No, I think it's just also worth just bearing in mind that there are some people who, as Mohamed was saying, are more vulnerable to a bad impact of COVID. And these are people who are older, over 65 years, for example, or people who've got underlying medical conditions. I mean, so many of us, frankly, have got those. So we're in that risk category. I mean, you may have a disability as well, for example, that could also put you into that risk category. So really for those groups, it's really even more important to be up to date with your vaccination, because you simply don't want to get a nasty bout of COVID. Now, maybe I could just be very open that I actually had COVID just after Christmas. I couldn't believe it, because all the steps I've been taking to avoid it. But I had 4 doses, and I had actually quite a mild infection. I was able to start also antivirals immediately or within 3 days. So frankly, I was very fortunate. It didn't really stop me doing what I wanted to do. I felt a bit unwell for a couple of days, but I developed symptoms. I thought, well, look, I better check whether or not this is COVID. I didn't think it was very likely, but the rapid antigen test showed that I had COVID. So I spoke to my doctor the same day. He prescribed me the antivirals. I was onto it immediately. So, I'm one of the fortunate ones, but there are people of my age, certainly a year ago, could easily have been seriously affected and possibly might have died. So I'm one of the fortunate ones, and touch wood, I haven't got long COVID either. So I guess I'm a bit of a success story in that.
John, maybe you could expand on, I think the corridor taking the antivirals is also very important. I think for people tend to sort of not think about it. I think maybe that you could be the best person.
So what exactly are antivirals? If you can explain that, John.
Well, it's a treatment that basically helps your body fight the infection. It doesn't necessarily cure you, but it can slow down the spread of the virus. So it gives your body more of a chance to come back and sort out the virus. So particularly if you've already been vaccinated, your immune system is already sort of ready and waiting. You might get COVID, and the antivirals give you a better chance to fight it. So a couple of points here. It's important to start treatment within 5 days of you getting COVID. So, you don't want to wait around, for a week or two and say, oh, well, look, I may not have it that bad. You don't want to wait till it gets bad. You want to start antivirals straight away. And it is available for people in particular risk categories. So not everyone is eligible under the current system to access antivirals. But if you are, particularly if you're older and you've got some underlying medical condition, then you are eligible. And your GP can get onto that straight away. And I did all this through a telehealth consult. I didn't have to go and see anybody. That the script was texted to me on my phone. I could then give it to the pharmacist on the phone, and a friend went and picked up the antivirals for me at the chemist, so I didn't leave the house. It was remarkable, and that all happened in the space of 6 hours. And I don't have any special access to GPs or anything. I'm just like everyone else. So, but it happened very quickly. The important thing is to start early with antivirals, which means you need to test early. And we've got these rapid antigen tests that are freely available from the council and lots of other places. So if you think you've got some symptoms, just do a test, because if you could start antivirals quickly, that could also be very helpful to you.
Thank you. My next question is, of course, about vaccination again. Can we do vaccination breakdown age-wise? Like if my child is between say 10 to 14, he should be up to date with the second shot or the third shot, and then subsequently, if we can explain that. Is there a breakdown like that at home?
Mohamed, why don't you have a go at that?
Okay. So there is different age groups for the vaccination. So there is also for 0 to 5, and then there's 5 to 11 or 5 to 12, depending on the type of vaccine. And then 12 and above, it's the same vaccine for everyone. So initially, remember, we had also above 60, then it came down to be 50, but that went out of the window. So nowadays you have Pfizer, you have Moderna, you have AstraZeneca is also there, but then you have Novavax. So these 4 vaccines are readily available for anyone to take. So again, they are recommending for anyone over 30, they could go up to the 5th dose. So that is recommended. For children, they are not recommending a booster dose. I think if they had their 3 doses, they should be fine. So children are still, I think the immune system is quite strong enough to, at this stage, they are sort of not being required to take a fourth dose or a fifth dose, as most of us are now being asked to take it.
So
it can be a bit confusing, who's eligible, So I encourage you to have.
My next question.
Yeah, I mean, talk to your pharmacist, talk to your GP, or if you want to go online and have a look at what the Victorian Health Department is saying or the Commonwealth Health Department is saying. So there's some quite good resources online, but I must say I'm a great supporter of our local pharmacist, and very accessible. That they'll be up to speed with who's eligible, who isn't. By all means, talk to your GP as well. But I think there is some good advice available. So if you're not quite sure what the setup is, you just reach out and ask. But I think certainly it is helpful if children do get vaccinated. There are rare problems from the infection. Some quite nasty diseases do occur amongst children, not as much as older people. So you are preventing them from the chance of getting a nasty, debilitating disease. And the same applies. You're also reducing the amount of virus spreading, and it's protecting more vulnerable people as well if children are vaccinated.
Do you still suggest children wear masks?
Well, look, I think, this is a difficult one. I mean, in schools, that's not the situation. I think we all just need to think through when we might want to wear a mask. I don't think there's a fast rule about this. And as Mohamed was saying earlier, we're all a bit exhausted by this. I think, during a very peak period of another wave, which we probably will get, probably we should be thinking more about wearing masks in areas where we can't distance or with people, perhaps mixing with lots of people. But in other situations we don't. I mean, I don't wear a mask very much these days. But if there was a big wave occurring, if I was going to very crowded places, I would certainly think about that.
My advice is on this. I think, as John has said, I think lots of people don't wear masks. But if I'm going to a crowded place, my recommendation is carry a mask. Carry a mask with you, and if you hear people sneezing and coughing around you, and you can easily identify whether people are sneezing and coughing into the crowd, or they are doing it in a muffled way. Like my best example is when I'm flying. I've been flying the last, and I do wear a mask on flights. I might be one of the small group of people wearing masks, but I do wear the mask, and I can hear people sneezing and coughing a few rows back. And you can see that, you can hear the muffled or the person sneezing into the area environment. So it does help, and you might even prevent yourself from getting other infections because people are sneezing and coughing, might have a cold or a flu. So my advice is for children as well, for parents, to give some mask, or put some mask in their bag, school bag. They have it. If they go to class and they find that there are one or two children sneezing and coughing constantly, wear your mask. Prevention again. I always think of prevention, but because unfortunately there are cases where people are going into groups who have COVID, and I know I've met people who have told me, "Oh, I had COVID. I went about my shopping." Like, it was horror for me. But how do you stop? How do you control this? Because there's no isolation needed anymore.
I mean, if I could just also add, Saleha, I think if you are sick and have got symptoms and coughing and sneezing, you really shouldn't be going around in places where someone could get infected, whether or not it's COVID or something else. I mean, there's some nasty other bugs. There's influenza for one thing, or there's another virus called residual virus, RSV. I think it's best if we do try and reduce the chance of us passing it on, and certainly wearing a mask would be very good at preventing you from infecting someone else. So let's say you're in a home situation, someone has got a cough and cold and symptoms. It's better if they keep away from other people, but if they have to, to wear a mask, that will just stop the likelihood of you passing it on to someone else.
And this is what I admire. Like 20 years ago, I went to Korea and I was traveling their public transport, and I saw people wearing masks. That was never heard of, but that's a common. Japan and Korea, I think, practice that culture. It doesn't matter if they have a cold. And then I asked some of the people I knew, I said, why are they wearing masks? They said they just got a cold. So it is that taking care of each other. I think that community spirit of looking after one another, I think, is something that we all can learn from. And I think COVID has taught us to a certain extent that we can protect, even if we have, as John said, if we have a cold, even a cold, that you wear a mask, you're protecting others. We can easily pick up a cold. It's very common to get colds, but again, people can suffer as well.
Long COVID.
I experienced, John might have not, I experienced last years in 2021. 22. It was funny. I traveled all over Victoria where COVID was rampant, talking to people. But somewhere in March, I think, I went to a party and I picked up COVID. But COVID itself was very mild because I was vaccinated. And I recovered within 4 days. But then I had long COVID for 3.5 months. I had headaches every morning. And I thought I do suffer from migraine, but this was not the migraine headaches that a person would get. I had it every day and I had to take painkillers. And so I was an example. Then I have another example I can give you, which I think she's a friend of mine, a young person, went climbing the Mount Everest last year, came back, very healthy, fit person in her late 30s, got COVID, recovered from COVID, but then for nearly 1.5 years now, she still cannot walk long distance. It affected her heart. So long COVID can be in many forms. Again, there's no textbook what long COVID is going to be. Each person, some people will have nothing and they'll be fine, but other people will have a whole lot of symptoms that can be long COVID as well.
I was telling John earlier, I know somebody, 28-year-old, perfectly healthy person, had COVID, then had long COVID, and then I think 2 months later had a heart attack with no history and still not okay, just, beginning to drive, had to leave his job, move back with his parents. And it is very tough for young people, I mean, it is absolutely unprecedented. Nobody expects this, but that's what's happened. And I know somebody else who says she's constantly tired. It's like, what it's called fatigue, some fatigue syndrome. Yeah.
Chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah. And she's so tired. She just can't, she can work for an hour and then she needs to lie down for 15 minutes and it affects her paid job too.
Yeah, and that's a big issue, isn't it? Because you can't work, and then that's you have other problems then as well. So look, we don't want to frighten people, but clearly we should all do what we can to reduce the risk of developing long COVID. So let's start at the beginning. Be up to date with your vaccination. It does reduce the likelihood of getting long COVID or the duration of long COVID. If you get sick, get tested, and if you're eligible, start antivirals, because that again will reduce the chance of you developing long COVID. So, there are things we can all do. If you've got symptoms, test yourself. Don't expose other people to whatever you've got, which could be COVID. So I think there are things that we can do now in the sort of the post-immediate period of the pandemic. We're going to have the pandemic, I think, for quite a while still, but in this next phase, I think we just have to try and make some balanced choices and just try and do the very best we can at reducing the risk to ourselves and to other people.
John, you might be able to correct me on this. Remember when SARS was there and people didn't realize that there was that scarring of the lung tissue, and there was lots of cases then that came about in UK they found that people are suffering. It happens 3 months or 6 months down the track, not immediately. Same thing with long COVID. It won't occur immediately sometimes. It can take some time. So I think this is an issue. The awareness that, yes, because same thing with COVID, it will cause, scar damage to your lungs. And if you were to get multiple attacks, which we know people have got, so it's causing more damage long term, you're going to have that. You're going to recover, but there's going to be that scarring that's going to take place, and that's going to cause problems for you.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I'm sure there are going to be lots of studies on this down the track, and we're probably going to find out that COVID, even acute infection, causes long-term problems. I mean, so there's concern about increasing rates of heart disease now, which potentially could be attributable to COVID. So I'm not just talking about 1 or 2 cases. I'm talking about the whole population being more at risk now of heart disease or higher levels of coronary artery disease than we've seen before. But look, we don't want to be thinking gloom and doom all the time, and we've done so well in Australia, particularly at getting on top of this, and we just got to keep going and just make this part of our normal life. Life is different now following COVID in all sorts of ways, and I think we just need to think about that in terms of our own personal health actions to try and do whatever we can to reduce the risk and help other people.
Just to add to what John has said, I think people are more aware. I think people are more concerned because remember with COVID, it was not COVID alone that was a problem. There's also the underlying social issues that cropped up, mental health, family violence. And like today I was at a session where this person who was a musician had lost all income for the last 2 years when, all that lockdown, and he had gone into depression. So, and today he came and played at this event, and it was beautiful to listen to him playing and all the joy on his face. So there's a whole lot of other underlying things that can, these pandemics can cause. So that care that we can take and support, and which is being done, I think a lot of communities have come forward and support, even Indian Care and all that, they've come forward and supported. So I think that it has created a lot of positives, there's a lot of goodness in people, caring for each other as well. So I think that's one way of moving forward, I think.
Yeah, I've been impressed, Mohamed, with how some communities have responded during the pandemic, in terms of reaching out, in terms of social support, helping people financially, preparing meals, collecting shopping. It has brought people together. And in some ways, we're in danger of losing some of that community spirit as we sort of get fed up with COVID. But, I hope some of those things will continue longer term because, certainly I think it has been helpful. And you certainly touched on the mental health issues around all this as well. So, as well as the physical health problems, there are mental health issues related to COVID too. So, again, we have to do whatever we can to try and help the situation.
So if there were 3 things that you could share with the community about COVID, how to keep safe, what would be your 3 top tips?
John, you want to go first?
Well, look, I have actually talked about quite a few of them. I'm going to, so look, look after yourself. Don't expose other people if you have got symptoms, in which case you need to be tested. And if you're positive and you're eligible, start antiviral. So that sort of managing, if you get COVID, try and reduce the risk of passing it on to other people and look after yourself. The second one, I think, obviously, is get vaccinated. It's not like a raincoat that you put on, you never get wet. But what it is, it stops the water getting through in large quantities and absolutely soaking you. So you might be a bit damp, in which case you can still keep going.
That's a great analogy.
But put on a raincoat by getting vaccinated. And I think the other thing is to think about sort of ways in which you might increase your risk. So we talked a bit about maybe you want to wear a mask in crowded situations, but the other thing is to let the air in, have good ventilation. Don't be in very crowded areas where there's no ventilation, where the windows aren't open. The virus spreads particularly through airborne disease. So if you're outside, the small numbers of people, there's good ventilation, whether it's the classroom or the workplace. That again reduces the risk of the virus circulating and you getting infected.
I think I agree with John. I think he's covered most of it. Just to add to that, I think one of the key things is, I think, being aware of if you were to have COVID, especially now we are going into winter for Australia, I think is very important. I think we're going to in winter, we are going to be in more enclosed environments as well. And I can add another layer is now we are going into fasting next month. When you're fasting, our immune systems and lots of our things drop. And especially religion is important for everyone, but sometimes if you can stay at home and do your religious observations, it might be better than going into, if you were having a cold or a cough, or you might not know you're having COVID even, you might go for evening prayers. You could easily spread it to a whole lot of people, because we know come next month there's going to be large gatherings at every place of worship. And also other religions are also having, there's Passover, there's Easter period all coming in. So people are in all these faiths going into places of worship much more during this year. And we're going, so I would say take care, look after yourself. And as John said, I think vaccination, we can't read how important vaccination is. And my thing is carry a mask. Always carry a mask in your pocket. Put it in one of those sandwich bags. Carry it with you. If you find that people are not sneezing and coughing, wear it. Especially on public transport as well.
Thank you. I was going to say that. I carry 3 masks in my bag, just in case.
Yes.
Public transport, very important.
Important. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, and good luck, everybody. We're going to get through this.
Yes.
We will.
The light is already shining through the tunnel. So we'll just get lighter. And thinking of Diwali, we need more light in this world, don't we?
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.